In this eye-opening story, a routine traffic stop takes a shocking turn when a police officer pulls over a black driver, unaware of who he's dealing with. The driver? A respected judge who spent years upholding justice in the courtroom. But instead of a simple exchange, things escalate as the officer's prejudice takes center stage. What happens next is nothing short of unbelievable. This encounter brings to light the everyday struggles many face and the power dynamics at play when authority and bias collide. How will the judge respond? Will this moment serve as a lesson in accountability, or will it spiral into something worse? Stay tuned as we unravel a story that challenges stereotypes, tests patience, and leaves you questioning the systems meant to protect us all. You don't want to miss what happens next. It might just change the way you see everything. As the officer approaches the car, his demeanor is tense and authoritative. The driver, calm but clearly aware of the situation, politely asks why he was pulled over. The officer hesitates for a moment, then claims it was for a broken taillight, but something about his tone suggests there's more to it. The driver, dressed sharply and carrying himself with quiet confidence, seems unfazed. He hands over his license and registration without question, but the officer's attitude remains confrontational. What the officer doesn't realize is that this isn't just any driver. The man sitting in front of him has spent years defending people's rights and fighting against injustice in his courtroom. But here, outside the ropes and the walls of the courthouse, he's just another person of color being questioned for reasons that don't quite add up. The tension builds as the officer takes the documents back to his patrol car. What happens next will leave you speechless. As the officer sits in his patrol car, he runs the driver's information through the system, expecting to find something, anything that justifies his suspicion. But when the screen reveals the driver's identity as a prominent judge, the officer pauses. For a moment, he looks uneasy, as though realizing the gravity of the situation. Still, instead of admitting his error, he doubles down, determined to maintain control. Meanwhile, the judge sits patiently in his car, quietly observing every move. He knows the drill all too well. This isn't the first time he's been profiled. What the officer doesn't see is the mental calculation happening in the judge's mind. Should he confront the officer's actions, or let this play out and address it later in a way that could have lasting impact? Back at the patrol car, the officer grabs his ticket book. But before heading back to the judge's window, he calls for backup. What's he planning? The situation is about to escalate. The judge watches in his rearview mirror as the officer steps out of the patrol car, now joined by a second officer who's just arrived on the scene. The air feels heavy, the tension thickening with every passing second. The first officer approaches the car again, this time with a more forceful tone. He asks the judge to step out of the vehicle, citing vague concerns about safety. The judge calmly asks, "Am I being detained, officer? Or is this still about the so-called broken taillight?" His voice remains steady, but there's an unmistakable firmness in his words. The officer's face hardens as he repeats his demand, but the judge doesn't move. The second officer watches the exchange, visibly unsure about what's unfolding. Nearby drivers slow down, some pulling out their phones to record. The atmosphere is charged, every moment feeling like the calm before a storm. What happens next will change everything. As the judge sits calmly, weighing his next move, the first officer grows more agitated. He places his hand on his holster, a subtle but clear sign of intimidation. Before the judge can respond, a small crowd begins to gather at a distance, their curiosity piqued by the escalating scene. Among them is a young woman who boldly steps forward, phone in hand, recording every moment. The second officer, still standing nearby, shifts uncomfortably and finally speaks up. "Do you think this is necessary?" he asks, his voice low but firm. The first officer shoots him a glare, brushing off the question. "Just doing my job," he snaps, his tone sharp. But then the judge does something unexpected. He pulls out his own phone and places a single call. Within minutes, another car arrives, a sleek black sedan, and out steps someone who clearly commands respect. The power dynamic is about to shift, and no one sees it coming. As the black sedan comes to a stop, the crowd watches intently, their murmurs filling the tense silence. A sharply dressed man steps out, walking directly toward the scene with a calm yet commanding presence. The first officer stiffens as the man approaches, recognizing him almost instantly. It's the city's chief of police. Without hesitation, the chief turns to the judge, offering a respectful nod. "Your Honor, I apologize for this situation. I'll handle it personally." The officer's face pales as he realizes the weight of what's just happened. The chief doesn't raise his voice, but firmly asks the officer to step aside. Just as the tension seems to break, the judge speaks up. "This isn't just about me. How often does this happen to others who don't have the privilege of calling for backup, like I just did?" His words hang in the air, prompting stunned silence. The chief turns to the officer, his expression stern. "We need to talk." The officer is escorted away, and the crowd disperses, still buzzing with what they've witnessed. But as the judge drives off, he glances in his rearview mirror, a quiet determination in his eyes. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a bigger fight for change. As the judge drove away, the weight of the incident stayed with him. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced something like this, but it was a stark reminder of how far there was still to go. He thought about the crowd that had gathered, the phone's recording, and the second officer who had hesitated. It wasn't just about the confrontation. It was about the bigger picture, the systemic issues that allowed moments like this to happen again and again. Later that evening, the judge sat down in his office, replaying the incident in his mind. He decided this couldn't end with him driving away, and the officer being reprimanded quietly behind closed doors. The next day, he contacted local community leaders and civil rights advocates, determined to use his position to spark real conversations and push for change. He knew that lasting change required more than accountability for one officer. It required education, training, and an overhaul of the culture that let bias fester unchecked. Meanwhile, the video of the incident began circulating online, shared by the bystanders who had recorded it. The footage showed the calm demeanor of the judge, the tension in the officer's behavior, and the powerful moment when the chief of police stepped in. People from all over the city and beyond watched, commented, and shared their thoughts. The incident became a spark for discussions about racial bias, power dynamics, and the need for reform within law enforcement. The officer involved faced an internal investigation, and the second officer, who had shown hesitation, came forward to share his concerns about the handling of the stop. This opened up new conversations within the department about accountability and the responsibility of officers to question unethical behavior, even from their peers. For the judge, the experience became a defining moment, a reminder of why he had chosen his career in the first place. He began speaking publicly about the encounter, using his platform to amplify voices that had long been silenced. His words resonated, not just because of his position, but because of the authenticity behind them. In the end, the incident wasn't just a story of a single traffic stop. It became a catalyst for change, reminding everyone that even small moments can have the power to create ripples that lead to something greater.